Thank you so much, Margarida. Well, you spoke about a dead archive, frail images that are frail, fragile, self-representation, a script, a liberation script, and I ask you all about one thing that interests me a lot, and it's about ethics. How do we work these images as artists, but also as researchers? Because, well, this question of representations and self-representations, the images, as you said, are so fragile, and each one of us, when he works with these images, creates new meanings, no? And we have these scripts, the liberation script, and, well, in the Soviet Union, for instance, you have the socialist, well, you have ideological discourse also on, through the images. And my question is, how about ethics? Because sometimes I find some works of filmmakers and even artists quite disturbing about the way they use these images. And I think that happens also with researchers that are working with these images. And, well, just a general question for everybody can answer. And perhaps after that we can open the discussion to the public also.
Well, I just to be very brief on this since I was on the... I think that, for example, for ethical questions, it's so difficult to somehow... They are really ethical questions. It means that there is no laws about this, or there is no rules about what is the right thing to do. It's in your mind. It's in your ethical. And each of us, like creators or creators of the new speech with image, a pre-existent image, we have to judge this. Sometimes I'm very, very, somehow I'm very... I remember that lately we had discussed a film called Concerning Violence.
Yes.
And I was a little bit like, oh, I don't know what's happening here, but I don't feel good with this ethical...
Yes.
But there is nothing approach with the use of this image. But this is in each of us. It's just I can just say something that it's maybe not related exactly with ethics, but there is something that I experienced during my research, is that films that are films, and that they have a kind of individual point of view, or you can say a more artistical point of view, images that are contained in that films that are much more difficult to be raped. And for example, in this in the archive of Mozambique, there is a film of Leonard that I personally met also in Sweden before I go to Mozambique, and he was always all the time in Mozambique shooting things. As balas no nosso país, as balas começaram a fluir. I remember that in this film that is so personal, and Leonard is such a sensitive director, and he was so poetic, and there is a kind of poetic in all these films, that it's so difficult to deconstruct this. If you put, well, of course you can use an image that is a woman doing something, but the film is so full of intention, individual intention, and artistical intention in the framing, and that it's difficult to use. So sometimes also image could be, for example, I have a lot of problems to see Leonard films, like in Concerning Violence, just put it there, and there is like, oh, this is archive image. No, it was a film, it's not archive image. It was Leonard's films. And so the ethical is this. It's very...
I think that we have to treat this kind of images with a lot of caution. Like, we need to avoid their historicization and their aestheticization. I think that there is an important risk, and in some exhibitions I felt that a strong risk of aesthetic deterritorialization. It is to say the images are emptied of their political strength, and they are just exhibited as aesthetic objects. And I think this presents two different types of risk. On the one side, because they are emptied of their political value, and there is no reactivation of the past, only like mausoleification of the past. And at the other end, what I feel that in some exhibitions is that no correspondences are established between the historical past, the struggles, the historical liberation struggles, and the political struggles of today. And I think that this correspondence between present and past must be made.
Thank you so much.
It depends on Soviet filmmakers. We should understand that they were tourists in Africa. And this is a very important point. If you are 5 days or 1 month in African country and you don't know what it is, but you have, you can understood, yeah, like a Soviet filmmaker. This is a question how they understood their African independence, how they understood, then they film how they understood. Yeah, so this is their very important thing, because it's not. We can't call it only just pure propaganda. Yeah, we can call it how the ordinary guy or ordinary filmmaker from the Soviet Union, especially from the 60s. So how they can understand it. Maybe it's also for me important to understand that in the 60s, by the Khrushchev's Tau, yeah, where the situation in the Soviet Union was a little bit similar. In compare with the situation in these 16 African countries that became independent in 1960. Then the Soviet filmmakers were influenced by his country, their own images of the Soviet Union, and they transmitted these images and construct these images. So on African soil. At the same time, we should understand that the Soviet Union filmmakers were censored by the Soviet Union government and by the government of the African countries. They wasn't independent. So yeah. Then they were between one example, extreme example from the Tanzania, for example, the president Julius Nyerere asked the Soviet government to make a film about Tanzania in 1972, and the Latvian filmmakers were invited to shoot the film. It was Rimtautas Šilinis and Andres Starošas. So, and after their rough cut, the Tanzanian minister decided to cut all white people from the film and all women in trousers. So then this is their extreme example, but shows that. And the director told me that my film was completely destroyed. It's not my film. Please don't say that it's my film. I say only my name is on the title, but I was completely commissioned. So, but this is the 70s. So in the 60s, they were maybe more free, in the early 60s. So.
Thank you so much. So, any questions from the audience? Any, well, opinions also?
Anywhere in the world, if you can find elements that can violate the human rights or social rights of people, these elements should be denounced, you know. No matter what traditions or tribal circles that you have throughout the world, it is important to denounce these infractions of human rights, etc. And if there's something good also, it's good to be exposing it for the other cultures to learn from and to make it go forward and to benefit humanity in general. And Raquel said something that goes in the direction of what I asked yesterday. Correspondence between the past and the present must be made. For me, this is strong. This is one of the reasons why I'm here since yesterday, trying to understand the legacy of what was the benefit or the influence of the Soviet Union in Africa when they were there, and what we have there today. Because so far, as I said, Mark is here yesterday. I don't know, maybe we went, it was too emotional to be, I don't know, reasonable or rational enough to be clear to me about the legacy. But yes, I would like to understand the legacy, not only in cinema, but socially in general. What happened then and what is happening now? What's the link? How can we connect what happened then and what is happening now? Because to have an event like this with the name is legacy of the cultural relationship, and just focus on the analysis of the past, I think is not enough. We should go deeper and try to make it noticeable to everyone nowadays what happened then and what is happening now. Mm-hmm. Because this is one of the main reasons that brought me here in first place, you know. And yes, I like what Margarida said about the comparative studies that should be done, you know. This is something that we need. Learn from the past and maybe improve and make ourselves in cinema or art, culture in general, something better for everybody nowadays, you know. So my question to the guys up there is if you can help us understand somehow throughout your researches and studies what are the elements present in Africa today that can tell us that a legacy was left and something is being built upon this legacy. Thank you.
So that's a very fine and hard question. Who wants to answer first?
When I said that the past must be linked to the present, I was thinking about the way liberation struggle, but also class struggle, is nowadays almost completely erased from the hermeneutic space. And I think as researchers or as filmmakers or as artists, it is necessary to re-establish that link between past and present, and not to regard it as a radical rupture, as if there is no connection between the past and present. That's why, like in my research, I always use the Ella Shawat's notion of post-anti-colonialism, because I think the notion of post-colonialism is too restrictive, because it's colonialism and then post-colonialism, and the anti-colonialism, which is so fundamental and which is so present today, even if not in the discursive and hermeneutic space, is erased from the notion of post-colonialism. And in relation to the elements which are present in Africa today, I'm not able to answer that question precisely.
I can also answer about the present. It's, but it's, for me, it's easier. Absolutely. For example, about the Soviet Union influence, for example, present as on dump, for example. It's just a lot of things that Soviet Union built in a lot of African countries. That ideology, okay, but ideology is Lenin is still in Moscow in mausoleum, you know. It's just so. But at the same time, in my niveau is a filmmaking, and we know, as Maria said before, that their African filmmakers studied in the Soviet Union, but they studied not ideology. They studied the filmmakers, the filmmaking. And their teacher were the important figure of world cinema. They were censored, the teachers by the African filmmakers, were censored in the Soviet Union so much, like Marlene Hutsi, for example, or Mark Donskoy, the teacher by Sam Ben Usman. So, and if we are talking about Cisse, Sissako, they influenced by their artists, not by the ideology. Where I'm as a Soviet Union child, so I always was in the distance from the ideology, because so it was so boring for me. So I don't believe in it. So, but I believe in the art. For example, it was the same. I think it was the same situation. If you have 70 years, the same ideology, so it's really the people make the career. Then if you will to make a good career, you should be in a communistic party. Yeah, should be a member of communistic party. Yeah, that. Then it's really a strong connection between ideology and profession, or that of influence of ideology on the filmmaking was strong, but at the same time, the teachers of the African filmmakers that study in the Soviet Union were more free from the ideology. So.
Well, your question is very wide, and also when I was reading again the relations, because it's Soviet Union and then countries of their influences, and also Africa. So there's a lot of big. So I can just because I'm not, like I said, I'm not a researcher. I'm a filmmaker, so I have these impressions, and since I do a lot of documentaries in research on the past, I can tell you that it's completely, all these influences are completely different. For example, Angola and Mozambique have a completely different relation, not only with Soviet Union, with also the countries of influence. And for example, the only thing is that we have a lot of, somehow, if I had, not now, a lot of prefabricated ideas about these influences. And for example, Mozambique was Samora Machel didn't like at all the Soviet Union influences, and then Agostinho Neto either. And for example, Samora also said that if he wants that his sons become capitalists, the first thing to do is to put them studying in Soviet Union. They will become big capitalists. So it said that, and it was very clear that Samora never had been aligned with Soviet Union, more with Korea and China, completely, without doubt. All this Maoistic influence was much stronger. And also when we look at this, also the question is, well, the countries of influences are of Soviet Union. We have to exclude China and Korea because it was a war, not. So there is so much of complicated things. What we can see in Mozambique or Angola today, I know more Mozambique, is not now exactly, but in the early years, in 2000, and it's this kind of very socialist bureaucracy. Everything was, aligned with these ideas that everything have to have a lot of filters. We never know really the things. When you talk, you don't say exactly what you want to say and things like that. And of course that these times have passed and people don't feel today. I think that it's not so strong in terms of day-and-day life and in the cultural imaginary of the common persons. I think that this was not, but of course it's there behind all the structure and also in all the structure of the way that the state work, and they're still there, isn't it? But there is a lot of things that you have to research yourself, and they are so complicated, and you have to choose what really you want to understand, because if it's concerning only to cinema, if it's such a complicated history.
Any more questions? Please. We have 5 more minutes, and so we have to be short now.
Yeah, thank you very much for this panel. I really learned a lot again, and I have a quick question. I hope it's quick to Margarida. You said something. I was really enjoying you talking about weak and strong images, and you said something like when a fragile image is in a film, it's more safe in a way. Did I get this right? Or there was something you said, like when it's in a film or a documentary, then it's not so fragile anymore. But maybe I understood this wrong.
Yeah, yes, I can just what I was trying to underline is that the image can be strong somehow, and also they are very strong because they contain what I try to explain. I don't know if you are related or you connect this idea of Propionic. I don't know if it's a word that you use in studies. I don't know. At least in cinema studies, we use this Propionic idea that it comes also from ethnography, and so image. They are strong because they contain all the time in them this moment. Someone went there to shoot or whatever, something happened in front of the camera. And this value, for me, it's indestructible, if you can say. But you can look at them and destruct completely the intention of that moment. So if, for example, I'm seeing an image of us talking, and suddenly this become in slow motion, and we see some expression on Raquel's face that it was not supposed to see in 24 images per second. So they become another thing. So they are strong because they exist, and you can see them, but you also can take them and put it in another context and make from them like a word. They are like words that I can construct a speech with this image and use it in a completely different intention that what it made. The only thing that is like that I was a little Raquel was saying that there is this ethical line between the possibility of using the image. I think that this ethical line exists, like I said before, in us, but I don't I'm not at all a defender of the sacrality of the image or something that is sacred in them. I don't believe in this at all. I think that they are done, and after they are done, they could exist for the world. They are not. There is no way to protect an image. The only way to protect ethically and somehow, it's not to protect them, it's to give them a meaning that you can difficult to destroy, is your point of view, is your artistic, it's your intention. If there is a lot of intention, it's somehow difficult to put it in the different context. This is my opinion. But even if we put it, for example, Raquel, if we put it in the art exhibition, and I think that we cannot protect. It's like our sons. We can do nothing about it somehow.
But just
yes,
a precision, I was not defending the sacrality of images. On the contrary, I think that in some exhibitions they are put like sacred objects because they are regarded as transparent images, as objective images, neutral images, ethical images, pure images, all these adjectives which are historically associated to documentary as a film genre. I'm defending precisely the contrary, the impression point of view.
Yes, I understood what you said. It's just that what I want to point is that we cannot defend it for being used wherever, isn't it? Just to finish, I remember something that I think it's interesting is this exhibition from Marlo Sahara that used this ethnographic image of Margot Dias. And for example, she put this
Glasses.
She put some, like in the television when we don't want to identify people, all the image, the anthropological image, are used with the subjects with this for not being identified. And I thought it was a very strong statement on this ethical of using image, because normally in anthropological image we say, oh, it's just people dancing and things like that, and we don't care about this. And she had put this artistic statement that I really enjoy.
I think we have time for just a very brief question and very brief answers.
Okay, well, my question can be very brief. In a way, it comes back to what Alexander was saying. And it's a question about economics. If I'm thinking about African cinema from a kind of very 101 basis, you divide it into the different linguistic groups, it's clear that the Francophone cinema was much more creative in my view than the Anglophone or possibly the Lusophone, although I know it less well. The Anglophone was, I think, not particularly interesting, partly because the British, after colonialism, first of all, they were never interested in training colonial subjects to make cinema, and then they left all their colonies behind, more or less. They weren't interested in the cultural relations, whereas the French were much more interested in maintaining cultural relations, and a lot of the films that were produced in Francophone African countries were produced with money from the Ministry of Cooperation in Paris, so that, in fact, it was a kind of, not necessarily neo-colonial relationship, but there was an economic relationship which continued after independence. The situation, obviously, with the Lusophone countries is different, because independence happened later, and there hasn't been that kind of interest in production. But I just thought, well, we have to bring this, because the films are economically quite expensive things to make, we have to bring that economic issue into our discussion. So it's not really it's not so much a question, it's more just an observation. But
Well, I don't know if you want to say something about comment what Mark Nash just said.
About the influence of.
Yeah, we'll have to be very brief, really, because
I'm not. I don't. Well, that's the only thing that I know and I noticed is that France has been very aggressive, like it is today, in terms of colonize culturally Africa, and they are the best, and they still the best until now, even in the countries of influence of Portugal, for example, in Cabo Verde, I saw Alliance Française fight for presenting Portuguese authors and things like that. But I think that in terms of cinema, I don't have. Yes, France and Fond Sud and a lot of other organisms from the state always connect to the Alliance Française have been helping the cinema in Mozambique, and in Angola not so much because it was a different period, but also for people that knows what is French way of sustaining culture, they are very precise in the objects that they want to finance. Very, very, very precise. This is the only thing that I know, and they still having a big influence in Mozambique today.
I would like to say also. If I'm sitting in archive in Moscow and I read archival sheets, some things about Soviet distribution of African cinema in the 60s and 70s, there are 70% of the films from Senegal, produced in Senegal. Whole films of Sembène Ousmane, so from 1966 so until 1978. Also a drop of Guinean filmmakers, so and a little bit Ethiopian, Somali, so 1-2 films, but from Senegal a lot.
So I think we'll have to close our table now. Thank you so much for being here. I thank you all for this wonderful table. Thank you.